Hi, my name is Justin Cellini, and in this video, I'm going to teach you how to study. Welcome to another video. If you haven't already done so, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to my YouTube channel. You could also find me on Instagram and on Twitter, and I also host my own podcast called Chicken Nugget Day. Check it out wherever you can listen to podcasts. Let's get started, shall we? This video is aimed primarily at AP students and college students taking a history course, but the skills I'm going to be teaching you would definitely apply to all subjects and all levels of different classes. Before we begin reading and outlining, we should know what our teacher expects us to learn from this experience. And that brings me to step 1, know your goals. Okay, perhaps your teacher gave you a set of guiding questions that should be answered as you're reading, or maybe a set of vocabulary terms. You should have those next to you as you're reading and outlining. This is important because every single school year I get the same question. Mr. Cellini, how do I know what to write down? How do I know what to commit to memory? What can I leave out? Well, if you have your reading goals side by side with your textbook as you're taking notes, you'll then be able to know what's important and what needs to be remembered and what you can kind of leave out. So make sure you have some reading goals. And if your teacher didn't give you those, we can definitely make our own through a quick preview of the textbook. So let's begin step 2, which is to preview the textbook, to establish clear reading goals, and to figure out how to best outline the text. Here is a chapter from the AP World History textbook that I use in class. As we flip through, we can take note of what the chapter will be about and how the information will be organized. The first thing I notice is the chapter title and number, and a listing of all the section headings in this chapter. We will use these section headings to help set up our outline. The next thing I notice is that there are nearly 2 pages worth of text before the chapter even begins. We'll talk about what to do with this information a little bit later. As I scroll through the chapter, I see red section titles, blue subheadings, and some paragraph titles in the margins that most likely represent what that paragraph is about. As I flip through the rest of the chapter, I see that the organization of the text remains consistent, and I also notice that there are some maps, some pictures, and other primary sources that I will want to go back to a little bit later on. Don't skip over these. Maps in particular, you should definitely be looking at because they can give you a sense of the geography, which is very important in the social studies class, and the map can also kind of give you a sense of the extent to which a state had control over a given region. Remember that part of the reason why we preview the textbook in the first place is to establish some reading goals. I'm going to take a look at the section titles, and I'm going to read the brief summaries under each of those titles, and I'm going to establish a reading goal for that section. Okay, you might ask yourself, well, what kind of questions should I be asking myself? This is history. We should know what happened, why it happened, and how it happened. So between previewing the section titles, reading the summaries, and keeping those questions in the back of my mind, these are the 5 reading goals that I created for myself based on this chapter. How did the Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties bring China under their authority? What were the social distinctions in China? What was Chinese society like in ancient times? How did religion develop in China? How and why did Chinese writing develop? And how did trade and migration link China to other parts of East Asia and Central Asia? What happened, why it happened, how it happened, based on the section titles and the summaries. Another thing to look for when previewing the chapter is which topics get more attention than the others. For example, we now know that this chapter will be about the Xia, the Shang, and the Zhou dynasties. But does the textbook dedicate the same amount of attention to each one? If you preview the text, you'll see that the Xia dynasty is assigned 2 paragraphs, while the Shang and Zhou dynasties get section subheadings and many paragraphs. This means that the Shang and Zhou dynasties are more likely to be historically significant, and we could therefore spend less time worrying about the details of the Xia. So a quick preview of the textbook can help us determine how much time we should spend studying specific parts of the chapter. Before we move on, take notice of some of the words found in the section titles. You'll find the terms political, social, and religion. These words apply to categories of SPRITE, which is an acronym that stands for social, political, religious, intellectual, technological, and economic. Your teacher may use a different acronym, maybe G-SPRITE, which also includes a G for geography. I won't spend time discussing what these words mean in this video in too much detail, but we are going to note the G-SPRITE categories that apply to our outlines in case our teacher asks us to categorize information at a later date. You'll notice that every one of the chapters in this textbook begins with an introduction that you will definitely want to read. These introductions usually highlight a specific detail that will be discussed later in the chapter in more broad terms. They will also discuss the major developments that you'll read about in the chapter, so if you read these introductions, you'll get your brain ready to receive new information about this topic. You may also decide to incorporate some of the ideas from these introductions into your actual outline. More on that later. Let's get started setting up our outline. The first thing I want to do is put the chapter title at the top of my page. The next thing I'll do is use a Roman numeral to represent the first section of the chapter, which in this textbook is colored in red. You should also be color-coding these sections in your own outline. Use 3 different highlighter colors, each representing a section title, a subheading, or a paragraph topic. Now you'll see a brief paragraph under the section title. You should already have read this when you were previewing the chapter and creating reading goals. If you haven't already done so, read these summaries, since they will prepare you for what you are about to read. We'll talk more about what to write on your outline shortly, but the general rule of thumb I would encourage you to follow is to limit yourself to no more than 2 bullet points per paragraph. Use your judgment though. If a paragraph is very long, that might mean that it's an important topic, and you could stretch it to like 3 bullet points. I'm going to use bullet points to represent the information pulled from each paragraph in my outline. Let's take a look at this summary paragraph and see what we should write down. Take notice of a few things I did here. I condensed a whole paragraph into 2 short bullet points by condensing bits from each sentence together. This is called summarization, and it's a difficult skill to master. I also rarely write in full sentences on an outline. I use arrows and equal signs to indicate one piece of information leading to another. I also like to use the equal sign to indicate what happened in a given period of time. Abbreviations are also extremely helpful. If you're in a history class, you'll be writing the words agriculture and population a lot. It may help you to use the abbreviation AGR period and POP period to represent both of those words to save yourself some time and energy. As you practice your outlining, you should always be thinking about how you can condense information as efficiently as possible. Now that we've outlined the section summary, we can start building our outline structure. I recommend using Roman numerals for section titles, capital letters for section subheadings, and numbers with parentheses for paragraph topics. So our outline should look like this so far. Notice how I am indenting as I proceed down the different levels of titles found in the textbook, and how I am leaving a space before the first section subheading in blue text. I am also highlighting the section titles, the section subheadings, and the paragraph titles different colors. You should do this, whether you're typing or handwriting your outlines. The different colors, indentations, and spaces make it easier to find what you're looking for in your outline, and it keeps everything kind of neat. Also, you should keep your Roman numerals, your capital letters, and your numbers all aligned with each other in your outline. Let's keep practicing. Notice how there are 2 paragraphs assigned to the Yellow River. That means that we should have no more than 4 bullet points, since we are limiting ourselves to 2 bullet points per paragraph. But before we start outlining, it's best to read each paragraph first before you start condensing information into bullet points. This will prevent us from writing down anything that might be irrelevant or extraneous. You'll also be reading through the content twice this way. which will help you commit the information to memory. I would pay close attention to the first sentence in each paragraph, since it will tell you what the rest of that paragraph will be about. You'll probably want to incorporate some of that topic sentence into your outline in at least some capacity. You should also be checking out the pronunciation of words if they are given. We do live in a global world now, and one way we can show respect for other cultures is to make an effort to pronounce words as correctly as possible. Pause the video right here and write yourself no more than 2 bullet points per paragraph for the Yellow River section. Then unpause the video so you can see what I wrote and compare it to what you came up with. First, take notice of the words that I decided to condense down into bullet points. Here's what I came up with. Notice how I left out some details that you might think are important. For example, I did not write down the length of the river in kilometers or miles in my outline. Take it from me. I've been teaching social studies for a lot of years now, and there has never been a question asking for the precise length of any river system in social studies. We care more about big picture things in social studies today, like your ability to analyze something and explain how or why it happened. So you don't need to be too specific in your outlines when it comes to these kinds of details. It's more important to know the significance of the river than how long it is in kilometers. I also left out the part about how loess soil was deposited by glaciers at the end of the last ice age. Remember your reading goals. In a history class, we're not interested in the fine details of geology. Again, notice how I do not use complete sentences, and I use a lot of symbols and abbreviations in place of words to convey the same point. Just make sure you can recall the full word or phrase that you are abbreviating. For instance, I know in the back of my mind that every time I write SOC period, that it stands for society or social. Notice how I also went back and added some information from the chapter introduction into this part of my outline, since the information would apply in this particular part. I also make it a habit to underline proper nouns, like the names of people, places, or organizations. I realized that this process of breaking down paragraphs into key points and summarizing them seems time-consuming and difficult. In the beginning, it may feel that way, but you will get more efficient with summarizing. This process is way more valuable for processing and committing information to long-term memory than simply copying sentences out of the paragraph and onto your outline. Let's practice the next 3 paragraphs assigned to the Yangshao Society and Banpo Village. Pause the video here and come back when you're ready to compare what you wrote to what I wrote. So now that we've reviewed the process of organizing your outline and summarizing paragraphs, we need to start talking about how to turn your outline into a study tool and make the most of your work. The first thing that you need to recognize as you're reading is that you are probably not going to know some of the vocabulary that you encounter. Sometimes we can gloss over some terms if we can still make sense of the main idea of the sentence or paragraph. If the word is repeated many times, though, this may indicate that the term is significant, and you should look it up. Another thing to keep in mind as you're reading is that even after reading a paragraph twice, you may not fully understand what you've read. Stronger readers take note of the important vocabulary and the concepts that they don't understand, and then either do some outside research or bring those questions to class the next day. I put these notes and questions in the left margin of my outline. For example, when you read the paragraph about the Yellow River, did you really understand what the word dredge meant? How about cultivators? That's a word that comes up a lot, so we probably should know it. What about the concept of complex society? Here's how I add these questions to my outline. I then go back and look these things up on my own, or I ask my teacher in class the next day. If your teacher is like me, especially in an AP class where much of the burden of learning is on the students, he or she will be open to using some class time to answering questions before a quiz. Take advantage of this and have a full grasp on what you're learning. Next, we have to assign even more value to our outline by turning it into a study guide. One of the strategies I recommend is to leave some room in the right margin of your notebook or get yourself some sticky notes so that you could attach notes to specific parts of your outline. Let me show you what I mean. Let's refer back to the Yellow River portion of our outline. Read over the material again and create an open-ended question that your bullet points can answer. So what kind of questions would work, you might ask? Remember the goals of studying history. You want to know what happened, how it happened, and why it happened. You may also want to keep in mind some of the historical thinking skills that your AP teacher probably told you about. Things like contextualization, causation, and comparison when making your study questions. Next to the Yellow River section of my outline, I'm going to attach the question, why was the Yellow River nicknamed China's Sorrow? All of the bullet points I put in my outline could be used to answer that question. Now I'll make a question for the Yangshao section of my outline. I'm going to create 2 open-ended questions for this part of my outline. Where were Chinese societies located, and why were recognized authorities needed in these societies? I generally assign 1 to 2 open-ended questions per numbered section of the outline. The idea behind doing this is that you can now go back, ask yourself these questions, and you should be able to answer them. If you can't, you have the answers right next to the question in your outline. So go back and study them. When you're done outlining, you should then transfer all of your questions to one study sheet or a set of index cards to review quickly. If you're making index cards, you could put the bullet points from your outline on the back of the index card. Whenever you can't answer your own question, go back and review the bullet points from your outline that apply. Finally, since many history teachers ask students to categorize content into a G-Sprite chart, I recommend that you label parts of your outline with the appropriate initial so that you can transfer those bullet points to a chart at a later date. For example, I would assign a G for geography to the Yellow River section and S/P for social and political to the Yangshao Society section. This is an optional step in the study process, and I would not recommend doing this unless you have a very full grasp of the G-Sprite acronym. Organizing your content into G-Sprite categories could be a helpful tool if your teacher often asks you to complete assignments in which you have to hone in on one of those specific categories. So that's the best way to outline and turn your outline into a valuable study tool. It's very important to take your time, be diligent, and be proactive with asking questions or looking things up when you don't understand something. In the video description below, I have left a link to a PDF scan of the textbook pages I used in this video and to a handwritten outline I have created that completes the political organization in early China section of the textbook. Please forgive my handwriting though, okay? Notice how I use a pencil so that if I make a mistake, I can go back later and fix it. Write your own outline for the rest of this section and then compare it to what I came up with. Like with anything else, with practice comes perfection. Good luck and keep on studying.